Hey there, Agile Mesa Falcons, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner, day in and day out. You've probably heard the story I'm about to tell already. It's a very popular sort of wisdom about life kind of story or sermon illustration, but I think it's very pertinent to what we're going to talk about today. And the story is about a newlywed couple. It's their first year together, and of course, they're learning a lot about each other and things like that. And Thanksgiving rolls around, and the husband is going to cook the turkey. And he takes the turkey, and before he puts it in the oven, he cuts a third off of it and then puts the remaining 2/3 in the oven. And his wife asks about this, and he says, well, that's how you're supposed to cook turkeys. And she says, I have never seen that done before in my life. Why do you do that? And he says, no, this is the way you cook turkeys. My mother taught me to cook turkeys this way. So a couple days later, they call up his mom, and he says, Mom, whenever you cook turkeys, you would always cut a third off of it. Why would you do that? And she goes, well, that's the way you're supposed to cook turkeys. And he's like, well, I'm getting some different feedback than that. Why do you do it? And she goes, no, it's the way you have to cook turkeys. That's what my mother did as well. So, they called up grandmother, and they're like, Grandmother, could you talk about why we have to cut a third off the turkey before we cook it? And she goes, yeah, my pan isn't big enough for a whole turkey. And so the point of the story, of course, is that the grandmother had a reason for cutting part of the turkey off before she cooked it because she didn't have a pan big enough. But as people observed that practice, they kept repeating it down through the generations, even though the pan size wasn't an issue anymore. The whole reason that practice existed had been lost. And now people were just kind of repeating it by rote and claiming this is the way you do this thing, right? Like this is the agile way to do requirements or whatever. And even though the whole reason that it looked that way was long gone, right? And the pan size wasn't even a factor anymore. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's kind of a silly story. I can't imagine anybody really doing that. Well, maybe. But I will tell you from experience that a lot of organizations do operate in exactly this way, where decisions are made, projects are prioritized, frameworks and methodologies are chosen, even various coding practices and architectural practices are done in the name of inertia and not because there's actually a reason that anybody can think of. We had a client some time ago, and they had various projects and products that they wanted Integrity to work on that were lined up for us. And, we would knock something out, and then whatever came next, we would just put the team on that. And eventually what rolled around with this client is they wanted a redoing of their shopping cart. They'd sold a lot of things online. They wanted a revamp of their shopping cart experience. And as we often do, we say, okay, well, who is the person who knows about this project so we can talk to them about what they're trying to accomplish, and when we have questions, we can go to them, et cetera, et cetera. And the VP of IT said, you know what? I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure who the person was who was interested in this project. And we're like, okay, well, that's no problem. We can probably find out. And we went around to all the departments. We talked to the department heads. Are you the one that wanted shopping cart revamped? Are you the one that wanted the shopping cart revamped? We couldn't find anybody in the organization that wanted the shopping cart revamped. And that organization would have spent a ton of money for Integrity to do something that nobody had any discernible reason to want. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't ever a reason, right? I'm sure that 3 years ago, there was a room full of people coming up with the product roadmaps for the next 5 years, and revamping the shopping cart ended up 3 years in the future. And then the people who made that roadmap all left the company. And so this priority was set. The reasons for it were lost to antiquity, but it was waiting there like a big economic time bomb for this client. And thank goodness we actually wanted to take the time to figure out the reason for doing that project, because it turns out that if there ever was one, nobody knew what it was. And in fact, nobody really wanted this project done. That may be kind of an egregious example, but this same principle occurs over and over and over again in organizations. They just do things by default because they've seen it done that way, because there used to be a reason and now there isn't, for all kinds of things. Organizations will do Scrum by default, or they will do Safe by default. So many coding practices and patterns are just done by default. The technical decisions, roadmap decisions, you just kind of go through them because at some point a long time ago, somebody decided that's what should be done. Even if I can kind of get on the other side of the fence a little bit, even things that your technical teams, your developers want to do from a technical perspective are sometimes done by default. We had another client here in town where a company had written custom software for them, and it ran everything for their operation, from accounting to job management to coordinating crews to scheduling to routing. This software just permeated every aspect of the organization. And at some point, the developers, who were not us, came to this organization and said, hey, there's a new version of .NET. We need to rewrite your system in this new version of .NET. And in fairness, I think it might have been in VB6 at the time, but this was years and years and years and years and years ago. Like .NET was still pretty new on the scene. They wanted to rewrite it. So our client said, okay, I mean, what are they going to do, right? The client isn't technical. So they just kind of took this team at their word that this needed to be done. So this team spent a whole year rewriting the system, no new functionality, no new capabilities, but there was an important change. Now the system had bugs where it used to not. And so they spent a whole year rewriting the system in order to introduce new bugs into the system. What did they get from changing the platform? Nobody knows. They didn't offer any kind of reason whatsoever. They just said, there's this new version of .NET. Your software needs to be in it. We're going to rewrite it. They were never able to articulate a business reason why this client should have gone with that. By the way, that's how they ended up being a client of ours, is after that experience, they did not want those developers working on their software anymore. Now, here's the kicker. There may have been good reasons for that, right? And if you're a technical person, then you know sometimes that happens with old technologies, right? Maybe the people who created it won't support it anymore. You know, this happens a lot with Microsoft. You build something on a Microsoft technology, and then 10 years later, Microsoft says we are no longer supporting that version. And now potentially you are at risk, right? Because if you have a problem, Microsoft will not help you through that problem. Potentially, that's a problem, right? Or there are performance differences or memory leaks that get fixed with new versions. Maybe it's hard to hire new developers because no one wants to work on the antiquated language that your system is written in. You know, people are sick of stored procedures. They don't want to touch another one, and your system depends on them. You know, there are potential reasons for making that decision, but my point is nobody knew what it was, including the people fighting for the decision. Right? It was just done by inertia. And so much money was spent ending up getting the exact same system with no improvements whatsoever. And in fact, it had the addition of key bugs that it didn't have before. Where I'm going with all this, especially if you are in some kind of leadership position, although honestly, this principle applies to everyone, on down to your most junior of junior developers. And that is, it is always appropriate and necessary, I would argue, to ask the question, what is the reason for doing this thing? Why are we cutting a third off the turkey before we cook it? Why are we building this new shopping cart now, all of a sudden? Why are we rewriting this into another technical platform? You know, we could go on, right? Like, why are we using Scrum on a project that we have detailed requirements for the next 2 years? You know, why are we doing these things? It's always appropriate. And now some of you are saying, well, thank you, Captain Obvious, right? I'm so glad I listened to a podcast that says I ought to know the reasons behind my actions and not act randomly. I realize as an individual, you think that, and as an individual, that makes common sense. Organizations, the multi-celled organisms that are corporations and organizations that we do work for, do not think that way. There's almost this assumption that if we're slated to do it, there must be a good reason, even if nobody knows what it is. But that is an incredibly dangerous assumption, and it is always valid to ask, why are we doing this? And then there's a follow-up question, because for many decisions, some people can come up with a reason why we should do it, but I would offer that having a reason even isn't good enough. You have to ask, is the reason good enough? Is the reason good enough to justify this action? And there's all kinds of factors that go into making that evaluation, right? Like, is this the most effective way to accomplish the thing the reason says it's after, right? Are there better ways to get this done than the actions that we've chosen because of this reason? Is the benefit worth the cost of this reason? is this reason even good? Or are we just assuming that it'll be good? We had a client one time where this actually happens with a fair amount of clients. At Integrity, we are really into domain-driven design and things like that. And when we code applications, we tend to use a lot of small focused classes as opposed to a small number of very large classes. And we find a lot of times with clients in their code bases that their developers don't like that. They like having, 10 files that have 8,000 lines in them as opposed to having, 30 files with a lot less lines in them, or however that math works out. And the reason for this is because they go, well, it's just easier to find stuff if it's all in one big file. Okay, that is a reason. Is that reason good, though? Is it easier to find what you're looking for if everything is in one big file? Is there a more effective way to accomplish that? Is the ease in which people experience finding things in the eye of the beholder? Is that worth the cost of the merge conflicts that will arise over and over again because 20 developers are all changing the exact same file, as opposed to changing the file that's focused on the capability that they happen to be working on? You can apply this to about every decision. And so when we're talking about agility, the same gauntlet needs to be run. So the first question is, what is the reason that we want to be agile? What is the reason we want to increase our agility? I alluded to this in the last podcast, and it's a question that I find clients just don't ask enough. They just assume, right? Okay, well, we were doing waterfall. That's bad. So we got to be agile now. But why? Why do your development teams and your development efforts have to be agile? Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be. I think most, maybe even statistically speaking, virtually all software development efforts could benefit from greater agility. But you need to have that reason for yourself. You need to have a reason for your context why agile or agility is going to be good for your environment and the kinds of products that you work on and the way in which you want the product development to go. Maybe greater agility is not actually what you want. I find that a lot of times when clients tell me, hey, we really, we're trying to be agile and it's difficult, after I ask a few questions, come to find out they actually don't want to be agile at all. They want to be fast, right? They want to develop faster, or they want to be able to release more at a higher rate. Well, Agile's not going to get you there, at least not by itself. We talked about that in the last podcast. Agile frameworks, agile values, agile practices, they're all oriented around increasing your flexibility and responsiveness, which may have the side effect of making you faster. A lot of agile teams do speed up, at least some, but that's not what it's for. If that's your focus, if that's what you wanted, I want my teams to be faster, then there's no reason for you to be pursuing agile frameworks as a way to get that, because they're not going to get you that, right? So what is your reason for wanting to be agile? What is your organization's reason for wanting to be agile? What are you hoping to get out of that? And then once you've identified that thing, then again, start to evaluate the reason. Is this reason even good? Is the cost of obtaining this reason worth the benefit that we will get from this reason? Are there better ways to increase what we want to get out of agility? Maybe your whole thing about agility is, well, we just want developers to collaborate more with the people using the software. Okay, great. That is an agile value. I don't know that you need Scrum for that, or Kanban or XP or any of that stuff. You could just say, hey, how about we change the way developers currently work on stuff so that they talk to users more? Boom, right? Problem solved. And you may have to work out procedurally how that's going to work in your environment, but you didn't need Scrum for that, right? You accomplished your reason in a way that was probably quicker, probably easier, probably has a lot less overhead. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do Scrum, but hopefully you're tracking with me here, right? Your decisions need to come from the reason, not the other way around, right? You shouldn't decide, let's do Scrum, and then back your way into why that was a good decision, right? What are you going after? And is this action plan the best way to do what you want to do? And that's true no matter what you pick. I'm only saying Scrum because it's far more popular than any other framework, but it's the same thing. A lot of times we'll work with developer teams and they're tired of Scrum and they want to change to Kanban. And I always ask, why? What are you hoping to get out of that? Now, they may say, well, the product work that we're doing, we've got a reasonably well-defined product. We're not really changing the product concept in any meaningful way. we do want to get feedback and we do want to tweak based on that feedback, but it's not like we're going to meaningfully change the core functionality of the product. So Scrum isn't really buying us anything because we are not releasing these product increments and then using that to figure out where we should go next. That's a great reason. That's a great reason to stop using Scrum. It just doesn't fit our product, right? Or it fit our product when we started, but now we're in pretty well-known territory and it's just not buying us anything anymore. Those are great reasons to switch from Scrum to Kanban. What if the reason is, well, Kanban has less rules than Scrum? That is not a great reason, right? It's true, but why is that a good reason? Okay, why do you need less rules? Is it because the rules are bad to begin with? Or is it because the rules are revealing areas in which you are not behaving in ways that are conducive to greater agility? It could be that the rules are painful because you haven't really done the things that you need to do in order to let agility flow through your teams and flow through your organization. And no matter what you do, whether it's Scrum or XP or Kanban or none of those things, you need to go through that process. Why are we doing this? What are we hoping to get out of it? Is this the best way to get it? Is the benefits worth the cost? Are the proposed benefits worth it for this particular project? For instance, you may have products where one approach is great, but it doesn't work as well for other kinds of products. So you may need to have some teams working in one way and other teams working in other ways. And usually when I say that, this is when clients respond with, no, we need standardization. We need all teams working in the exact same methodology. But why? What's the reason? Well, a lot of times people don't have one. They're just like, well, standardization is good. Well, it's not good in a vacuum. Like what are you hoping to get out of standardization? What benefit does that get you? I don't know. We just need everybody to do the same thing, or we need everyone's Kanban boards to look exactly the same, or what? Why, right? And maybe you have a good reason, possibly you don't. And that's why you go through that process before committing to that decision. Even, and maybe even especially, purely technical decisions need to run through that gauntlet. Because managers, people in leadership position, just because your technical people say a technical thing needs to be done, don't stop there. They are probably right. But whatever it is that they need to do needs to be articulatable. Is that a word? Articulable? Or Cora, edit that to make me sound smart. They need to be able to articulate it in a business value sense. I have to be able to tell a non-technical person what we get out of this. Does it improve performance? Does it get rid of a problem we've been having? Does it keep us from a risk? Right? What are the reasons? Does it save us money? What are the reasons that this technical thing needs to be done so that we can evaluate it against other things? And technical people are sometimes pretty bad about being able to articulate that. It's kind of ironic. I'm having trouble articulating the word articulate today, but a lot of times they're not great at it. And part of it may be that they've never had to go through the exercise before, but part of it may be, there actually isn't a good reason. It just needs to happen. I'll give you a closing example of this. We had a client once. They had a very, very long query against the database, and they wanted to optimize it. So they needed a developer named Phil Ledgerwood to look at this big, long, honking monster and convert it into queries that would run in a more optimized manner, which is a great idea. I mean, the query was slow. I will give them that. But one of the things I asked was, how often does this query actually run? How often does your web application actually need this query? And they're like, I don't know, maybe about 8 to 10 times a year. 8 to 10 times a year. So even if I saved 45 seconds on that query, you know what? Heck, even if I saved 10 minutes on that query, I would never save enough time to offset the time that they would spend optimizing it, right? We would never make that equation work. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, right? It seems on the surface that that's a great idea, right? We got a slow query, let's optimize it. On paper, that sounds like a great decision. But once you start asking the question, is the cost worth the benefit, right? Once you start asking these questions we've been talking about, you might discover that even something that has a good reason, it's just not worth it. And it ends up becoming a bad reason. So that's what I want to leave you with. Wherever you sit in the corporate hierarchy, I don't care how long your company has been doing a particular practice. I don't care what consultant has told you that you should be doing this or that, or what you've read in a blog. or what some authority in your field has said you should be doing. I don't care what other reasons might have coalesced to form that decision. It is always appropriate to ask the reason why you are doing something. And upon finding out what that reason is, weighing and sifting it carefully to see if the reason is even worth accomplishing in the first place. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.